Oh, this sounds nice. Use the smartphone tariff when traveling, just like at home, without any extra costs. Well, this is possible in the 27 EU member states plus Iceland, Liechtenstein and Norway. Actually, not in Great Britain anymore. Actually, since EU Brexit at the beginning of 21, the EU roaming regulation no longer applies to Great Britain. And the network operators here in Germany have since then voluntarily treated the country as if there had been no Brexit, and still want to do the same in 2024, at least according to reports by the telecommunications portal teltariff.de, which asked Telecom, Vodafone and O2. Telephoning and surfing in other EU countries regulated by the European Union is often referred to as roam like at home, and Europeans traveling in another EU country are only charged the same amount for phone calls, text messages and data as they pay at home. Telephony and data flat rates can largely be used as at home. Because the network operators reserve the right to make possible adjustments in the future, the experts recommend, as before every trip abroad and before a trip to Great Britain, to be on the safe side. So always check your provider's tariffs and pay attention to the information in the welcome SMS that you will receive when you arrive the first time the smartphone is logged into the network of Britain, for example. But roaming is only a tiny component in the entire collection of the Brexit consequences. A lot has therefore changed in British opinion, of course, since the referendum as well. In the years following the EU referendum, several YouGov studies were dedicated to exploring what kind of Brexit Britons most wanted to see. Now, almost 4 years after Brexit has happened, and with attitudes to exiting the EU having soured significantly, the future nature of their relationship with the EU is still a key issue. While Keir Starmer has pledged that Labour will not return the UK to the EU fold or even the single market, there is clear desire on the continent, most prominently Emmanuel Macron, to bring the UK closer into the EU's orbit. For their part, some Conservatives are calling even for further loosening of ties with Europe, and while not an EU institution, the desire to leave the European Court of Human Rights that politicians like Suella Braverman have suggested would mark a significant step away from the legal norms binding the continent together. The most favored proves to be the first on the list, and that's rejoining the EU. Around half of Britons say they would support overturning the 2016 referendum result, including 33% who strongly support doing so, making it by far the most passionately supported of a number of options they were given in the poll. A third of Britons say they would oppose rejoining the EU, including 25% who are strongly opposed. And this survey finds that 42% would support the lesser step of joining the single market, although just 23% strongly support doing so. And by contrast, 22% are opposed and as many as a third are unsure. And people will note that these figures differ a lot from a separate recent survey which found that 57% of Britons would back joining the single market. It's quite interesting that polls can be so different. But two factors likely account for the majority of this difference, and the first is that the more recent survey implicitly sets the single market option against an option which Remain voters will find more appealing, and that's rejoining the EU itself. Answering with that comparison may dampen enthusiasm for the single market option among the pro-European section of the public. The second is that the previous survey more explicitly highlighted the consequences of single market membership on immigration policy, namely that it would mean EU citizens would have the right to live and work in the UK and vice versa again. It's likely that many pro-migration respondents who otherwise don't understand much about single market membership nevertheless backed the idea on this basis. And all the don't know responses were lower in the older survey, and this suggests that this may have been the case. Maintaining Britain's current relationship with the EU proves a relatively unpopular option. 3 in 10 say they support the status quo, although only 6% strongly support this approach, making it the option that enthuses the smallest number of people. And by contrast, 44% oppose keeping things as they are. Further loosening ties with the EU is supported by 28% of Britons, including 11% strongly. This is, however, also the most opposed option, both overall with 54% and strongly with a third. Unsurprisingly, the results differ substantially depending on how Britons voted at the EU referendum at the last general election. More than 80% of 2019 Labour voters, as well as Remain voters, support rejoining the EU, and about the same number oppose loosening ties with the EU any further. While 74% of Leave voters and 69% of 2019 Tory voters oppose rejoining the EU, support loosening for ties further is less substantial, although it's still the majority option at 56% of Leave voters and 53% of Conservatives. Loosening ties with the EU proves to be a more popular option for Leave and Conservative voters than keeping things as they are. However, with the status quo being supported among those by a reduced rate of 46 and 33%, and among the latter by 39 to 31%. And when it comes to joining the single market, 60 to 65% of Labour and Remain voters would support doing so, while Leave and Conservative voters are much more divided. Those who voted for Brexit in 2016 oppose single market membership by 29 to 28, while 2019 Tory voters do so by 39 to 31. And if you look at the crossover support for different policies, you see that most who support EU membership also back joining the single market and vice versa. And those who support the status quo or loosening ties further oppose both forms of closer relationship with the EU. And there is lower crossover support between the status quo and looser ties, however. Among those who want to keep things as they are, support for loosening ties further stands at 49% only. Among those who want to loosen ties with the EU further, than has already been done, whether or not the status quo is acceptable divides the opinion. 45% say they would also support keeping things as they are, but almost identical 44% are opposed to this. And recent YouGov polling has shown significantly different levels of support for single market membership, depending on whether the question mentions freedom of movement. In a November poll, a majority of Britons, as I said, with 57%, said they supported single market membership if it meant that EU citizens would have the right to live and work in the UK, and UK citizens would have the right to live and work elsewhere in the EU again. By contrast, in a poll this month, only 42% said they supported membership when asked in isolation, with a corresponding increase in don't know responses, and that number grew by half. With a return to single market membership seen by some as a solution to the UK's economic woes that does not overturn the 2016 EU referendum result, this could therefore be the next political battleground on how closely Britain should be connected to the EU, although they always forget to ask the opinion of the EU on that. The public are most likely to correctly state that single market membership would involve paying an annual contribution to the EU's budget, and that it would not require the UK to replace the pound with the euro. Approximately 4 in 10 correctly identified that single market membership would allow the British businesses to establish themselves and operate freely in the EU, but also vice versa for EU companies, and that there would no longer be import duties on goods imported to the UK from the EU and vice versa, and that EU citizens would have the right to live and work in the UK again and vice versa. The public are least likely to correctly state that single market membership would mean that Britain would fall under the jurisdiction of the European Court of Justice again, and that it would not give Britain voting rights on EU laws. And the last point is the one on which the public are most likely to be actively mistaken. 23% believe that single market membership would give the UK voting rights on EU legislation. That's not true. And those who support Britain's membership of the single market are more likely to be aware that this would allow British and EU companies to operate freely in one another's territories, and that there would not be customs duties on goods traveling between the two realms. And while 60% of those who back membership are aware of these facts, this falls to 40% among those who are opposed. Indeed, opponents of single market membership are more likely to think that all those facts are actively untrue than the supporters would. Single market supporters are also more likely to be aware that it would allow EU and UK citizens to live and work in one other's territory. Again, as I said, and for their part, opponents of single market memberships are slightly more likely to be aware that this would bring the UK under the jurisdiction of the European Court of Justice again, which would be true. When it comes to erroneous beliefs, supporters of joining the single market are more likely to incorrectly think that this would give the UK voting rights of EU laws, because the ones opposed don't believe in that. And there you see why it's important still to talk about what those things would really mean. Entering the single market, applying for EU membership again, there's so much that's still not understood here. First of all, joining the single market, just joining the single market in the customs union without becoming a member is not as easy as a lot of supporters put it there. And I'm not repeating everything now. I made a video on this. And the same, or not one video, I talked about this in a lot of videos already, so I will not do it today again because the video is long enough now. But there's a lot that people underestimate. It's a quite complex and nearly, even if they apply, nearly improbable thing to join the single market and the customs union. It's extremely complicated to make that stunt. And the other one is even applying for EU membership again is a very complex thing as well, would not give them the same membership they had before, because all the rebates and opt-outs would be gone. They would have to apply like any other country that applies for EU membership and under the same rules. And also, I don't think that the EU member states would agree to that after all that happened so far. So there is a lot people should think about when they are talking about these topics and when they are demanding these topics. It is by far more complicated. The Brexit referendum was not an easy decision that can easily be just reversed. No, it can't be. It is a very complicated task to repair the whole thing now, and people need to know the truth about this. We had enough lies in the Leave campaign at the time. And people that are talking about joining the EU or joining the single market and the customs union need to know the facts here. And that's why I made videos where I listed all of this that's required, because people need to know. And if you need to know more right now, the next video is right here in the end screen. I'll see you there. I'll be back.